Now you're going to have fun.
Yeah.
Hey, folks. Welcome to our 9th Unity 2020 Campfire. I have the distinct honor of introducing Matt Welch, who is editor-at-large at Reason Magazine, and Bridget Phetasy, who is a journalist and podcaster. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bret. Is it Phetasy?
Phetasy.
I'm Phetasying it in my mind all the time.
Sometimes I get Phetasy or fat assy.
Oh, okay. I got a new one.
I think the important thing here is that I got it right. Am I correct about that?
You're correct. You got it right. Yeah.
We won't even try with the whole Weinstein thing because, like, it's terrible.
It's so easy. It's so easy. Yes, it's like the Bagel Brothers shop, but with a W.
What?
I just don't even.
You never heard Einstein's Bagels?
We're already lost.
Einstein's Bagels.
Get your son to restart.
No, we can't do that. All right. Well, community folks, we are actually here to discuss very serious things, and the hour with respect to those serious things has grown so late that I'm afraid we've become a bit loopy. But, I mean, that's it. You know, you got to face the tough times with a sense of humor. That is, I think, to be certain. So I am going to, as has become our tradition, light a candle or two just to have a little bit of actual fire in the room. I, being in Oregon, am going to be very careful with the fire because, frankly, the state is already ablaze, and I don't want to make things worse.
Matt's going to burn his apartment down.
Yeah, this is not comfortable.
So, Matt, you're in New York.
I'm in Brooklyn here, which is, as I was talking to Bridget earlier, is my neighborhood's kind of coming to some kind of normalcy. You walk outside and it's about 87% there, which is a tremendous relief because it was a really bad spring, to say the least. And with the exception of all of us, like arranging pods for our 5-year-olds, it almost resembles a normal city now.
So when you say resembles a normal city, you're talking about it returning from whatever it was doing for COVID?
Yeah, I mean, imagine, so I have a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old. The 5-year-old, who's a very social and horribly behaved creature, didn't interact with a child for 2.5, 3 months. It just absolutely mangling. Her first play date after COVID, I had, tears in my eyes just seeing the need, and you know this more than most, Bret, but like the need of humans to pick the nits out of each other's hair and like just to be an animal around one another. And so, that's changed a lot. The playgrounds finally opened. They were closed for 3 months. It was really, streets were empty. I didn't realize the extent to which I needed, and I'm attracted to cosmopolitan settings, not necessarily because I want to talk to anybody, but I want to go out in the world and see commerce and see interactions and, say hello to the guy selling me avocados, and you just want that. And for 3 months, in addition to all the deaths and the horror and the woe, that was choked off in New York, and it still is in whole swaths of Midtown Manhattan and elsewhere to a degree that's really dislocating to people. But it's a lot better now here.
Well, this actually brings us squarely to the point because, I won't speak for you. You can feel free to disagree with me if you want. But my feeling is the opportunity to deal with COVID well was there right in front of us, and we botched it so badly for reasons that I think are almost entirely political that, as you point out, Matt, we're just paying an incredible price. Children are paying a developmental price, and so needless, too, because the playground probably could have remained open. We've known since almost the beginning of the pandemic that for various reasons, the virus does not seem to transmit outdoors, at least not during the day. And so, we could have taken much better advantage of summer, and instead we played games with the virus. And of course, Unity 2020 is about trying to break out of our toxic political dynamic and do something different.
I mean, what this brought home to me, and it kind of brings into a lot of the themes of your project, is that it's as if people want the political fight. That's it. That matters to them. They want to be able to blame Trump or to blame de Blasio, both of whom deserve a lot of blame because they both suck. But like, they want to have you feel a sense of relief when people can just say, oh, okay, well, he's that politician that I don't like. And they did that ridiculous thing, which they're inevitably going to do. And therefore, I don't have to like pay attention to how the science of the stuff changes because we're learning so much more every week. You could just stop all of that and get back into the familiar, reassuring fight of politics. And it's so crazy and infuriating because everyone wants to pin like morality on the policy to various people when geography has mattered almost more than anything else. Like it's where you live. It's like it's hot over here. Okay, now you have it. Now you don't. Based on that, much more than did you have this mask policy? Did you do this thing? Did you close these schools? That stuff matters on the margins. I think a lot more than people want to admit because it's not easy to have a stupid political fight about it.
Well, I also think there's an aspect to which people are so used to being powerless that they have no idea that acting out their political frustrations is actually putting the republic in jeopardy. And I must say I have this fear that I'm going to spend the rest of my life holding back the urge to say, I tried to tell you. I tried to tell you. It was time. It was all hands on deck. It was time to do something radically different. It was time to take a gamble on something that really didn't seem like it would work because that was our best shot. And people will let it go because they have the sense of like, well, whatever it is that's going on politically is just one more phenomenon that happens on a screen. And that's not how it is. This is going to have, just as COVID has produced deaths, our playing games with our governance apparatus is going to have dire consequences in the material world for people who've done nothing to deserve those consequences.
But I would also caution you not to get despondent about specific moments in time, particularly in politics, and to reflect a little bit about what brings the three of us together besides technology and some other kind of things. One thing is that you can laugh about some stuff. And actually, there is a broad and growing universe of people who are just trying to grapple with stuff honestly and by their own lights and to not be drafted in whatever tribal war is going on. That's ridiculous to a lot of people. A lot of the politics, especially in June and July, when the world was losing its mind, have just been all about that. And we have all received how many hundreds and thousands of emails saying, "Thank God you're out there being sane in a crazy world." That says to me that there's reason for hope.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's what I've heard the most, even just from the past couple weeks, just writing the why I won't vote, people just saying, I might not agree with you, I might be moving this way or that way, but just being able to occupy the space where you don't have to define yourself and you don't have to necessarily put a label on something and you can just be confused. Like you can just feel like, I don't know what the thing to do is, and I don't know who's right, and I don't know that I have an answer either. That says, people need that and want to feel like they can express that too.
And that might not feel like a specific, gain. But I would submit that it is actually. There's a mindset question here. Can you, stake out a world to be an individualist and just to be a humble person in the face of a crazy world? And is that attractive in a world where the people who were previously kind of gatekeeping a lot of those functions have screwed up? They really have screwed up, and they've narrowed their own ability to talk to various audiences. So if things are going to get to a better place, and I'm more pessimistic about that than I have been in a long time, it's contrary to my California nature. But if that's going to happen, then it's going to be because of Bridget. It's going to be because someone who's absolutely laughing and also like sketching out, like, I am this person, deal with it. And we need a lot more of that and a lot less of like, oh, is this the sign that I need to put up in my window in order to pass muster? And I think that actually is way more attractive to people and galvanizing to them than even us realize.
And just letting people be. People, when I put out the call for people to explain maybe even just their political migration that has occurred over the past 4 years, they were just so grateful. And it almost at the end of every single email, and you guys probably hear this too, is, oh, thank God, that just felt so cathartic. That just felt so good to get out. That felt so good to just tell somebody the truth. That just felt so good to tell somebody my story and not feel like I was going to be judged or shamed. And this is, coming red to blue, blue to red, independent to either. It's not necessarily, I don't think one side owns the shaming or the making people feel like they have to be quiet. A lot of it is geographic as well, just to come back to that. It's interesting to see the people who are moving in one direction or another. It seems to definitely be a lot about where they're living and what they're primarily surrounded with.
So I'd like to get a sense from both of you about what you think is likely to unfold. I mean, I guess let's take unity out of the picture for a second. What do you think's coming down the pike between now and November, and what happens on Election Day?
Oh, golly. Whoa. Who knows? But but it's been remarkable the extent to which that this election has been really stable. We live in an incredibly unstable, instable year. All this crazy stuff is happening. This year has lasted 75 months so far. And if you look at the polls, they're like, beep, nothing is spiking or moving anything. Like, oh, they held a convention. Who cares? Nobody watched. Stuff doesn't. There's a lot of people who thought that the unrest in Wisconsin and the riots in the streets were going to really move the needle, and Portland was going to set the world on fire in addition to setting Portland on fire. Although I guess the entire West is on fire just by its own volition, in addition to idiots burning things. But none of that moves the needle. So I think that it's a much less, on some level, it's much less combustible in terms of I don't think there's going to be any big event that's going to shake the bits from its foundations. But there's a logistical problem with the mail-in votes that's going to be massive. And I worry that we're going to spend, given the tribes are absolutely, as Bridget was saying, doing the Spider-Man meme of pointing at each other and seeing fascists everywhere and that they're all crazy. And that they're all trying to delegitimize the election. It's going to be a bad place. I don't think we've seen the last of the political violence, certainly in Portland itself and in other places. And I think it's going to be a pretty ugly, unless it's an absolutely decisive win on election night by Joe Biden, which it would have to be in this case, I think, partly because he's ahead and is very likely to win the popular vote, at least. It's going to be a pretty bad couple of months there. I don't think it's going to be untenably bad, but we're locked in a cycle of populism. Populism is not most people's friends, and this is a global cycle of populism, and we're seeing it here now. And I think we're 20 years of cycling through a bad place right now.
Matt or Bret, do you think a lot of that stability you were talking about is the fight or flight or freeze? People are just kind of frozen right now too. There's so much fear in the air, in the world, and in general that I don't know that people are trying to get their kids back up and running to go to school. They're just in really basic survival mode in a lot of respects, trying to get their jobs up and going again and return to some sense of normalcy as the fall comes. And they're just not really even paying attention. We pay a lot of attention, but I don't know that the average American pays as much attention.
Well, I don't know. It's very hard to say anymore what's actually taking place. I'm shocked a little bit by Matt's understanding of what's coming down the pike, because it doesn't look at all like what I see. And I'm sure that a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have this very arbitrary force which shows us things for its own reasons, and we have no idea what kind of edit it is. So I don't think Biden is headed for a win. It's hard for me to imagine it, actually. It's not hard for me to imagine that Trump will surprise us again and confound the polls, because I think the very same force that did that the first time is, if anything, amplified. So I guess I'm curious. It's certainly worthwhile for us to compare what it is that we're seeing and try to reverse engineer whatever it is that the algorithms are distorting. But I have the sense people I'm interacting with, and I don't just mean my circle, but I mean the people who are, writing to me over the transom and all, people are paying a lot of attention, and frankly, they are frightened. And what I don't hear in Matt's description is that at some level we are watching a battle, that this protest movement is really about the redistribution of opportunity and well-being. And it is fantastically powerful. It's having a real effect on the way we do things. I mean, we are actually defunding police departments, which is going to have a very predictable effect on the amount of crime. And it's also, I believe, going to increase the brutality of policing, because if you have too few police, they are forced to use violence to exert any sort of control. That in some sense, the reaction to defund them is exactly the opposite reaction. So it's hard for me to imagine that this doesn't end up with either an immediate rebellion against the protest movement, which I'm afraid of, that rebellion into there's no problem in America, there's no race issue whatsoever, that mindset is very dangerous, and it could come out of the election empowered, or this woke insanity could come out of the election empowered, and it could start remaking the landscape, along the model that it just announced for the Academy Awards, for example, where we're going to have spot checks of sets to see whether or not you have enough of the right sort of people behind the scenes in front of the cameras. And frankly, if you were going to run this experiment, Hollywood's about the safest place you could do it. But it already sounds pretty draconian.
I thought that was a joke when I saw it. I had to double check and find the source material. I didn't even think it was real. But
been a lot of those recently. I mean, be a public school parent in Brooklyn, and a lot of things that you think are like, nah, they wouldn't really do that, would they? It happens on a daily basis. Like the slide that they showed in the training kind of process here to teachers to get people their implicit bias training. There was a slide about signs of white supremacy, and some of those included things like
being white.
Well, not even just that, but it was like being overly focused on like grammar and by objectivity, fetishizing objectivity, just like a bunch of like crazy things that shouldn't be confused with white supremacy. It is all around. I wrote about this about a year ago because we're dealing with it with our kids. This big equity push here, desegregation, and I use air quotes on purpose in that case because I think that segregation is the wrong way to describe the sorting of people by ethnicity in New York school department. But I wrote about this a year ago in a completely speculative way, partly influenced by the experience of Bret and Heather, and seeing that depicted by my colleague Michael Moynihan, but also just like I'm dealing with the craziness all around me, and like, hey, look, I know this sounds like science fiction, but this is probably coming to a school district near you, to a public policy debate near you, where people are going to use the R word as a cudgel, not aimed at the people with the hoods on their heads, actually aimed at people who everyone knows is a progressive because they live in Park Slope or they teach at Evergreen or whatever. They're going to use this knowing that the captive audience will be cowed. So Bret, I share a lot of your basic kind of critique and horror, and I'm more even horrified that I was, a year ago writing like, I know this sounds crazy, but it might come to you soon, and then it came everywhere by the summer. What I disagree with is what that means going forward. Partly because I still retain some of that California optimism. I don't think that when this comes in contact in reality with people who have to deal with it on a kind of a normal person basis, it strikes them overwhelmingly, in my view, as crazy. Like, don't come at me with this. Like when people read about the Academy Awards, it's like, what? And also part of it, to Bridget's point earlier about people are just trying to organize stuff for their kids right now. Like I spent 1 week, the Republican or the Democratic convention week, I was on vacation helping out my dad in California, so I watched none of it. And then Republican convention, I watched it for work because I had to, because I was back on the clock. And it was so striking, the difference in my own perception of things, because I'm paid to look at it. And so everyone in my journalistic cohort is like, wow, that speech is really going to leave a mark, and this is going to do that, this is going to do that. People don't care. People are freaking out. They're unemployed. They're trying to figure out what to do with their kids. And that actually matters more to them, I think, than what's happening in Portland, even though what's happening in Portland is so awful. It is so profoundly stupid and self-inflicted, and Ted Wheeler needs to be sent on the slow boat to Madagascar to his own personal re-education camp, and all this madness around Trump and that world, crazy and awful constantly. But I don't think that the lived-in experience of most people right now is that. I think that it is their own madness that's around.
I feel like Trump's going to win a landslide.
Yep.
Wow. Right.
I do too.
That's my gut instinct. I hope I'm wrong. I mean, in some ways, I don't hope I'm wrong, because I would like it to be decisive either way. Not that it's going to matter, like you said, but at least something like that. But I know it's all anecdotal. I do account for the self-selection bias from my emails, but it is predominantly... The most surprising thing to me is the number of Democrats who were red-pilled by the media throughout the COVID and the riots. They just they overplayed their hand in such a massive way. They just took for granted that they would believe anything they said, and people were out of work. They had more time on their hands. They started listening to your podcast, Matt. They started listening to Bret. When they started saying, wait, why are we locked up and there are these protests? What's going on with this? And why are epidemiologists getting behind this excitedly? And why are they calling these riots peaceful? They turn to alternative media sources in massive numbers, I'm hearing. And that has, I cannot tell you how many Democrats who are leaving the Democratic Party behind and they're enthusiastically doing so have written me. And that's a small sampling. How many of those people are there out there? And they're not going to come forward and say this to their social group. There's a huge social cost for people to say that in their families, amongst their friends. And so I don't know that we really have a clear picture of how pervasive that is.
Perfect. So let me ask you this then, because I resonate with an awful lot of what you said. And I see people fleeing the Democratic Party too, and I understand exactly why. I think they're right to do it. What I don't understand is why the expectation is that they would end up in the Republican Party, right? That seems to me out of the frying pan and into the fire. And go ahead.
Yeah, what's so interesting that I'm hearing, and I've heard, again, it was surprising to me, was just that reiterating a lot of what Trump supporters were saying, was that they feel like he's the only person who's going to stand up to this kind of push that they're feeling. And I've been writing and talking a lot about this. I don't think we can really underestimate the effect of these kind of micro cancellations. Most everybody leaving the Democratic Party also has a personal story of rejection, being shamed, being fired, and how that drives you into the arms of, like you said, it can, I don't know that it's rational, but I do think it's a very common response to being rejected.
Okay, but here we are. It's 2020. We can all agree there's very serious stuff that needs to be navigated. Both parties would appear to have delivered a non-viable answer to the question. As far as I can tell, the Democrats have delivered no answer except that the Republican answer is wrong. For every election that I can remember, the question was if and when the party would go negative. In this election, I don't think the party has gone positive. I don't think they've articulated a single positive thing. Their only argument is not Trump. And frankly, it's not a compelling argument in the slightest. We actually need adults to govern, and to deliver us somebody who is so decrepit and so devoid of vision is, frankly, it's insulting to Democratic voters. And it tells us that even if those voters think that getting Trump out of office is the most important thing, that the party doesn't feel that way. If they did feel that way, they would have given us a much more compelling candidate. So why, in light of the collapse of our duopoly, would we not actually entertain the possibility of electing adults who are outside of it?
I say this as someone who has written about, covered third-party presidential campaigns for 20 years now, and tends to vote for third party as well. Duopoly isn't dead. That's why that we have a two-party system, and it is enhanced. Not the parties themselves, but duopolist thinking is enhanced by negative polarization. The biggest thing that struck that home to me was in 2018 in the midterm elections, highest voter turnout in 100 years in the midterm election. Mm-hmm. Wow, is that because people were super excited about the Democratic message? Hell no. They wanted to defenestrate Donald Trump. They were completely focused on this one goal. And what happened to third parties and independent candidates, of which there was a lot, including some people who were pretty strong and pretty interesting. Gary Johnson, who had been the most successful presidential candidate in the Libertarian Party history, tallest dwarf to be sure, but he ran as the Libertarian Party candidate for the U.S. Senate in New Mexico, his home state that he was the governor of twice. And he ran against an incumbent that no one couldn't pick out of a police lineup, and a Republican who had never run for anything before. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is a state he won. He got 9% of the vote, more than that in 2016. So, like, friendly confines, right? He should be able to do this. Rand Paul endorsed him and gave him money, right? This seems doable. He got 15% in 2018. He barely moved the needle because in moments of high negative polarization, which we have right now, people are more duopolist than ever. So yes, you're absolutely right in your critique, Bret. Like, it strikes me personally as someone who's never been involved in a political party or joined one, strikes me as crazy. That's not how I would do it. But looking objectively at how people behave in moments like this, it is entirely predictable that in 2018 and in 2020, there is no third party real vote happening here. It is all that energy is going into the negative fight against one another. And so the question is, how do you break out of that? I wish I knew. I think part of it is to have conversations like that.
Well, I don't think it's going to be a third party. What I was thinking was a second party would be really cool, right? We have like one party, which is the new sort of Trump GOP hybrid. And then we have another thing that used to be a political party, but really just doesn't have anything this time around. And it is ripe for replacement. And so what I was sort of thinking was that a bunch of different entities that have harbored implausible dreams of making it to power as third parties might gather together under a unity umbrella and rush the battlements. And what I don't understand is that I see people of means actually physically moving their lives. I see people engaging in one of the most painful and unpleasant experiences that life has to offer, and that is to say, moving from one city to another, packing your stuff up, living out of boxes for, months or years as you unpack in your new place. People are doing that. They're not lazy. They're willing to invest a great deal to get out of the way of what they see coming. But somehow what we have been told about third parties makes it impossible for people to even imagine the birth of a second party in the death of an existing party, when we actually have a perfect historical example. And Reason magazine did a brilliant job of outlining just how much this particular election actually reminds us of the way the Republican Party was born in the death of the Whigs.
Well, then you have to, let's say if you're remaking the Democratic Party, and I think you're right to say that that's the most viable way to do the new thing. Nick Gillespie and I wrote a book called The Declaration of Independence in 2011, and part of what we were arguing is that the self-described independence is actually the largest bloc. It's 40+% per Gallup, Democrats and Republicans are all like 35 and 27 or something like that. It varies. So like they're kind of ready to go, but since we have this structure, what happens is that people take over the existing shallowed, hollowed out, insincere structures from the outside. So Donald Trump took over the Republican Party from the outside. Bernie Sanders tried twice, and he kind of won ideologically. He just never won as a person. And so here's your problem, Bret, is that like Bernie Sanders is doing that. Are you on Team Bernie?
I was.
Is that why aren't you now?
Because Bernie endorsed Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016 rather than running on his own. Now, frankly, I don't think Bernie had the right answer. I think Bernie is far too backwards looking, right? I don't think he had the insight, but what he did have was the legitimacy. He actually inspired people, and because he did represent a challenge to the Democratic orthodoxy. So yes, I was an enthusiastic supporter, not in 2020. But what we have, well, we've got the possibility of Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, and I have to think that just about every thinking person would find their election a tremendous relief. And the idea that they would be elected in a power-sharing structure in which they would actually talk to each other about what was in the interest of the nation. I mean, a real bonus that Unity has advanced these two candidates to be drafted who actually happen to really like each other. They're not total outsiders. They come from the parties, but they like each other. They're not down with this partisan demonization. And I just don't see any way in which it's not the better option.
I don't know that. I mean, people love their teams. I think maybe not as much enthusiasm for Biden, but I think I don't know that. It seems like even the people who were independent and felt adrift that I'm hearing from, they were just automatically, they were less inclined to just stay adrift and more inclined to get on board with a party because they felt that negative pull. You know, they just felt like they had to choose a side, essentially, pick a side or die. And I'm not sure that I don't know how you break that force. You know, I don't know how you galvanize people to, because I get told constantly that, you know, I'm part of the problem. So people don't want to feel that way.
Objectively true, regardless.
No, you're a big part of the problem. But no, look, how are we going to defeat Goliath? Well, Goliath just croaked. Okay, I am a lifelong Democrat. I know plenty of liberals. I live in probably the most liberal city in the country. I have literally not met a single person who is enthusiastic about Joe Biden. Not one. I've met people who are enthusiastic about his election, but the only reason they are enthusiastic about his election is because it will mean the end of the rock in their shoe, which has their entire focus. I did know people who were enthusiastic about Hillary Rodham Clinton, which I did not understand. But nonetheless, those people existed. They don't now. The party has abandoned the idea of articulating anything or inspiring anyone. Its only reason for existing is to be the antithesis of Trump. And it's a terrible argument, especially when it is arguing and playing games with this woke ideology, which, let's agree, the Democratic National Committee does not believe in this woke ideology, but it's cynically playing with it in order to placate people, in order to convince them that it's on their side, and it won't be able to control it. So it's going to put us in terrible danger if it wins. And obviously, there's a terrible danger of the other side winning and leaving the impression that there was nothing to the anger in the streets, that it was all made up and nonsense. So, you know, I mean, I guess I'm stuck on this till it's no longer a possibility, but it seems to me like everybody is arriving at the conclusion that the reason not to do it is that it can't happen. But frankly, us having battles on Twitter about whether or not 2 + 2 actually equals 4 could never happen. Right?
Why not throw that energy behind a third party?
Because they can't win.
But
they can't win.
and our third party can win.
It's not a party. That's why it can win. Here's the thing. Let's talk about, since Matt's here, let's talk about the libertarians. Okay. The libertarian ideology is not broadly resonant. It has very dedicated people. In my opinion, it has an important part of the puzzle exactly right. But overall, it does not inspire a great many people, even though I think it has a part of the picture quite right. I will never vote for it because it's got another part of the picture quite wrong. So my point would be that thing doesn't have the power to take over for the Democratic Party, for the Republican Party. It doesn't have the power to activate enough people to actually take power. We can say the same thing about the Green Party, right? I resonate with an aspect of what the Green Party is about. I do believe we have to behave sustainably. On the other hand, I don't think the Green Party has a deep understanding of the interaction between that necessity and the economic necessities moving forward. And I think a lot of people agree with me. So my point is, the reason that unity could work is that it isn't a party and it doesn't suffer the problems that a party suffers. It's absolutely non-ideological. That includes my ideology. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. This isn't a ticket designed for my dreams. This is a ticket designed to figure out what the interests of the nation are and to navigate that direction because it's what we have to do. Will that be able to capture enough enthusiasm? It could. The obstacle to it is that people think it's impossible, but it's impossible only because people think that. So
right, and you just said that it's impossible for third parties to win too, which is why Bridget was laughing. I want to answer that, but I want to preempt my answer with a question for you, Bret, which is this: you're right about the rising tide of wokeness, and it's driving people batty, and it's taking over a lot of institutions. I think faster than I previously was prepared to admit. And you were right calling this out in advance, partially because you'd gotten your ass kicked in first, but although I think it worked out well in the end, if a little bit too much force, to quote Bob Dylan. But Joe Biden was not the woke candidate in this race. Everyone who tried to go woke in the Democratic primary lost badly, embarrassed themselves badly. He never did. He wasn't on Twitter. He wasn't like trying to get the Chapo vote. He doesn't know what any of that stuff means.
Right.
And he won. And I think that reflected a bit of pragmatism on the part of some Democratic voters, especially more conservative black voters in the South, who stop it with this woke crap. Let's get the old dude who's been around for literally 47 years, who's a total rusty weather vane. He's not going to be like an excitable revolutionary. We know who he is. He's a known quantity. He's absolutely mediocre. Great. He's our guy.
Yeah.
Let's not reward Beto for going crazy and apologizing for his ancestors because they were slave owners, whatever crap he was doing. All the people who did that, including people like Beto, like Julian Castro, like even Kamala Harris, but to a different degree, Kirsten Gillibrand, all those people had some centrism, Cory Booker, in their background, their history. Like they were in favor of charter schools, or they wanted to balance budget amendments, or they were much more vociferous about sending the troops home and ending wars and this kind of stuff. They buried all that stuff and they went woke. They thought going woke was the way to win, and they were wrong.
Yeah.
And isn't it significant to you, as someone who hates that stuff above all, that, hey, look, Joe Biden won and he was not woke. So maybe your prescription of the Democratic Party, Bret, is somewhat wrong.
No. You're misunderstanding what I think is going on. I don't think the Democratic Party, certainly not the powerful internal aspects, has any patience with this woke stuff. It is cynically playing with it as a political ploy. In other words, what we've arrived at is a place where the inequality of opportunity has made people angry. People know that the system is rigged, and they know that it's rigged against them, and they're pissed off. Now, that moment has come many times historically. And who do people go after? They go after elites, basically elite rent seekers, though we wouldn't have used that term in most of the prior instances. But in this case, the elite rent seekers have a different plan. which is they're going to feed one group of Americans to another to satisfy them in order to retain power. That's what the Democratic Party is doing. It's a very dangerous game. I don't think Joe Biden is woke, but I do think his placing Kamala on the ticket was a signal, and I think it was a very particular kind of signal. And I think Kamala Harris is playing her role in such a way that everybody understands that Joe Biden is their ticket to continue. It is the pathway to make this view on things dictate policy. And my concern is not that the Democratic Party is going to embrace it. My concern is that the Democratic Party thinks that they can control it and they can modulate it, and they're wrong. That's my fear. And so I want to correct a couple other things too. I know you were kidding, but first of all, I don't think I got my ass kicked at Evergreen. I think I did have to leave, but I think I came out all right. And people,
no, you came out way out on top. No, it's like,
but not only that, people resonated with seeing somebody say, "No, I'm not a racist," and I know it. Right?
Yeah.
They needed to see somebody say that, and so.
And for those who, maybe they've listened to your podcast without completely consuming the horrors that you and Heather went through, like, go out and seek out that source material, because it is truly inspiring. As our friend Camille Foster has said memorably, and I presume we can work mildly blue here, is be brave, call bullshit. And that's what you guys did. And your lives are, I think, materially better and more interesting as a result. And it's a model for all of us. So yes, I was kidding, having fun, but I find what you guys did inspiring, as you well know.
I take no offense, and I didn't mean to imply that. I just wanted to make sure that people who weren't necessarily following that story know that it didn't look like me getting my ass kicked, which frankly would have been embarrassing. But
everyone left the conversation and started Googling Bret ass kicked.
Ass kicked, yes, to see if there's video. There isn't,
Evergreen,
because it never happened. But the other thing, look, I do want to make this point. I am saying that I do not believe a third party can win. And I am saying unity is not a third party, and the distinction is not arbitrary. My point is unity is constructed to be non-ideological, and that's the distinction between it and all of the third party options that we have, right? No matter who you are, if you want adults running the country, this is your movement.
Okay. I have a question just about the libertarian thing. What part of it do you think is not right, when Bret, when you were saying part of it they don't do right?
So let me say the part of it I think they have right first, and then I'll talk about what I don't think is complete about it. For those who don't know my background, I'm a biologist. I did my PhD work on biological trade-offs. And I came to understand as I was doing that work that every two desirable aspects of a mechanism or a creature have a trade-off relationship between them. That is to say, if you push them far enough, if you want more of X, you got to have less of Y, right? That's a fundamental part of the way the complex systems universe works. And by that logic, we have to be very careful about maximizing any particular value, any virtue. Right? So if you love justice and you push it too far, you get some bleak gray communist nightmare, right? Your liberty evaporates because you wanted justice too much. And it doesn't really matter that it was justice you were pursuing and that justice is good, because you shouldn't have allowed freedom to disappear. Now, what I came to realize late is that liberty itself is the one virtue that doesn't work this way. That you actually, if you take a integrative view of liberty, you can actually use it as a proxy for everything else. And the reason for that is because in order to be truly liberated, and I don't mean liberated in the abstract, where you have a ton of rights you can't exercise, but in order for you to have lots of options that you can actually act on, we have to have solved all your other problems, right? You can't act on your ability to start a business if you're wiped out because a medical catastrophe robbed you of all your capital. So we've got to protect you a bit from medical bad luck in order for you to be truly liberated, right? We have to protect you from crime. We have to protect you from all sorts of things. And so my point would be, if we maximize realized liberty, not abstract liberty, but realized liberty, the real stuff that lets you do things that are desirable, it means that we solved all your other problems. And so what I think the libertarians have right is that they have focused on liberty as a special virtue because it really is one. Now, what I think they have wrong is that they typically take a narrow view of liberty, and they come much closer to the abstract set of liberties and maximizing those, often at the expense of realized liberty. So I would just offer you a paradox. It is wonderful to be able to fly around the globe anywhere, to have a passport that lets you travel, to have aircraft that are capable of taking you where you want to go, to have the freedom to arrive there, be safe enough to move around and not worry about being harmed. But all of these things arise out of regulation, right? The safety of our air travel system, for example, is the result of regulations that have evolved over many years, and some of them seem draconian, but it is the very fact of it being a well-regulated landscape that allows us to be liberated by it. And this is the model that I think we should be shooting for all sorts of things, is a system that is elegantly regulated in order to liberate. So
I would just add, don't ever have a libertarian on your show talking about the regulation of airlines unless you have 75 hours. But the deregulation of the airlines in the 1970s, of which Reason Magazine played an active role, was actually part of the reason why plebes can travel. As opposed to just people traveling in first class. We had regulation. We had a cartel system of airlines from 1930s to the mid-1970s that didn't change at all. It was the relaxation of the ridiculous bits of that regulation, which is not the dismantling of safety standards. It's like, I won't let, PSA Airlines or whatever thing was happening at the time to decide whether this competitor can fly that route. When they got rid of that stuff, then the world of Southwest came into being, and that was a good thing.
Oh, so by the way, I agree with this, that I am not in favor of regulation for its own sake, and lots of regulation is self-serving. It's effectively thinly veiled corruption, and some of it is unnecessary. And as we saw in, I've forgotten which crash it was, when the oxygen generators went off in the cargo hold of a plane. In this case, it was actually regulation that probably caused the crash because there was so many checklists that people had to sign off on about what was in the cargo hold that nobody was paying any actual attention, right? They were just ticking boxes. So I'm not arguing that regulation is a good thing. I'm arguing it's a necessary evil and that there's some optimal level of it. And frankly, it's not something I hear from libertarians very frequently. And it's possible the libertarian movement has moved on. But I do think, in general, they are under-imaginative about the hazards of an open landscape. And there are places where you want an open landscape, and there are places where you can't afford it. But anyway, I'd like to see a richer conversation about that.
Get Bob Poole on here at some point. But I wanted to just say one thing, not about libertarianism, but about sort of the unity centrism. And you might bristle at the term, but if you're going to have Tulsi Gabbard, Dan Crenshaw, by definition, and the word unity is in there. One of the issues that we have right now in our polarized world is that the people who I would describe as temperamental centrists actually doesn't really have anything to do with where your ideology can be mapped. It has to do with how you interact with the world. And I would describe the three of us as temperamental centrists in our way. Like, we want to be able to have conversations with people, not to have politics or ideology be a deal breaker in having an honest and hopefully fun conversation. The people who are temperamental centrists in our politics right now are despised, with the exception of people who are operating in their media spheres, right? Like, Joe Rogan is a temperamental centrist. He's a rich man. He's purging his archives, but he's a rich man. But in politics, Jeff Flake is a temperamental centrist. He was absolutely vilified within an inch of his life. Just Dimash, maybe he's more liked than Jeff Flake, ideologically libertarian, but he wants love and understanding between people. Screw him.
Yeah.
That's not the flavor. Howard Schultz was going to run as a temperamental centrist, and people just
boycotted Starbucks.
Vitriol. It's not a cozy place in our polarized time. So how do you How do you deal with that, Bret? I'm curious.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think you're actually talking about an artifact. And so I will say that there is a force that opposes what you're calling temperamental centrism. And I have a different version of this. I like your version. It is about temperament, right? But what I would say is that the center is where patriots meet to discuss what is in the nation's interest. And so I'm not remotely a centrist. And frankly, I do find the term centrism has such a tepid connotation. I really dislike it. But I do love the place where we meet and we disagree. And, the ability to go to that place and to treat others honorably and to hear what they have to say and to discuss what you yourself might have wrong, I find that invigorating. And I know, because of what I've seen through IDW and all of the things connected to it, that it is widely resonant. Now, yes, as soon as you get anywhere near the official public square, you are told it is despised. But I tell you, you know who really seems to despise the idea of unity? Twitter. It is amazing the garbage that they have deployed against us. And it's like, it's actually, you can demonstrate it. It's mechanistic, right? The number of bits of oddness that takes place when you attempt to post a link from Unity, when you attempt to do anything, when you attempt to include a mention of our website in a direct message, all sorts of funny things happen. And I mean, even today, even my tweet of this very broadcast, I spelled it very carefully. I had my son check that I wasn't, missing a letter that I couldn't see. And lo and behold, the link didn't work. And, he scrutinized it 3 times. So there's something about Twitter, and I would argue it's going to be the same if you're talking about Facebook, right? It's going to be slightly different if we're talking about Google, but nonetheless, the immense power of these entities that are getting their bidding done by signing up with one of the political parties, or in some cases, maybe both, right? That thing causes them to despise unity because unity is us rebelling against their disproportionate power. And so I guess what I would say, Matt, is I wonder how much of our being incensed at temperamental centrism, as you put it, is really either people responding in a Pavlovian way to the cue that they are supposed to become rabid, or us responding to a false story even about what people do think. We're supposed to think nobody's going to like you if you, if you go into the public square and you attempt to make peace with people across the aisle, and it turns out the experience is very different than what you would imagine.
No, they hate you. My experience is that they actually hate you. No, I prefer captain of the fence riding team. Thanks. That's what I'm going to go with. Not centrist.
But what do you mean they hate you? Lots of people love you.
No. So yes, I think that, sure. I'm sure there's an audience for somebody like me. It's certainly not as big as it would be if I chose a side. I don't think. I think that most of the mainstream relies on that duopoly to kind of function, especially cable news networks and in the space we occupy. And I do think a lot of people just get annoyed with it. They're like, shut up, like pick a side, stand for something. I hear this all day long. I hear a lot of great things, but I also hear a lot of the idea that I'm carrying water for either party, depending on who's yelling at me. The idea that I'm just a wishy-washy person who doesn't have a real opinion about anything or any real beliefs, or, I've heard a lot of those. And I don't even think like the people who I would consider the elite on the blue checks on the left don't even take me seriously. It's like they just kind of see me as a joke.
Well, but wait a second. So you say you hear these things all day long. What do you mean here?
I mean, I see, I see them.
You don't hear.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
but this matters so much, Bridget. So, I mean, look, you know my history, right? I see that same stuff you do, right? On Twitter, I get taken to task all the time by people who tell me I'm vile, I'm a grifter, I'm this, I'm that, right? So I see that stuff. I never hear it, right? When people take me aside, and it happens a fair amount. I mean, it must have happened several hundred times in the last 3 or 4 years. When people take me aside, it's always nice. Now, it may be that the people who have nasty things to say are holding their tongue, but I don't even see their looks. When I see somebody and I see that glimmer of recognition and they take me aside, they get up the courage and they come over and they say, "Are you Bret Weinstein?" I say, "Yeah." They say, "Hey, let me tell you something." And then they thank me. They tell me how important it is to them that I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't get any of that hate. So there's something about that online environment which is very distorting of what people actually think. And frankly, it's a window into something, but I don't think it's a window into reality. In fact, it may be just the opposite.
There's I think an argument to be made that the COVID has accelerated that so much because we don't pick the nits out of each other's hair anymore. We just experience things through this kind of interface media. I have no problem with it because I'm a creepy shut-in and I don't need to be in an office with a bunch of people. But like you can see, I mean, I'm sure all of us who are part of this and who are watching and listening, like you might work with someone who has become like a solid 45% more paranoid over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Just not even about like, they bugged my home or anything like that, but just like unsure about the social cues in interactions. It's hard. It's just like, you can't tell sarcasm on an email, right? Like it's a different interface. And I think we're totally underestimating the amount of which that has warped our basic communications. And Twitter is basically that. Twitter was the training ground for our horrible Zoom kind of experience that we have now. And it's bad. There is something about that is wrong. And again, I say this as someone who does not want to go to the office. I don't want to be in a room full of people. I got work to do. I don't need all the chit chat. But humans, turns out, I think, need more than we realized to be able to understand that, just to kind of relax a little bit and to understand that we're cool together and not take the worst possible, like edited, you on your worst day thing as the avatar of your fundamental being.
I agree that this has been accelerated, and I wonder how soon it is before, when I see a lot of these things are bots, obviously, but also they're people. And sometimes I'm out in the world and I'm like, who out here called me or called somebody that I know something, somebody had to do it. Some people in the world are saying these things, privately when they're at home. And I wonder too, I've heard from multiple people just in the past couple of weeks that it's an interesting use of language. I saw a literal Facebook fight in a restaurant, is the way they termed it. Or I saw the real life version of a Twitter interaction in a grocery store. So I'm wondering how much that boomerang is now swinging around. And because we've been living online, the psychology is starting to spill into the streets.
Well, actually, I wonder, now that you mention it, I wonder if the very unfortunate conflict with the masks isn't that. In other words, in general, people, I remember when email was new and we discovered that people got into trouble over email much more readily than they did in person, right? It was missing, the glint in the eye, the little stuff that tends to keep you out of trouble. And, of course, emojis or emoticons were built to solve that problem. But nonetheless, the fact is humans don't tend to want to create conflict with other humans in close quarters because it's dangerous, right? And so in general, people do have some kind of diplomatic skills and they deploy them. And that means that when you encounter somebody, you often, they do have enough charm to keep from getting into a fist fight. But once you have team mask and team I won't put a mask on because that's tyranny, right? Once you have people who are broadcasting which team they are on in the same way that people broadcast it online, I wonder if it does precipitate exactly that sort of response.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting, there was a book I read, it's called The Online Disinhibition Effect. And it is the effect of people being anonymous. And a guy named John Suler wrote, he was really early writing about the psychology of online behavior. And it's basically him talking about why people behave certain ways when they're online and they don't behave that way. And I have been trying to get him on the podcast to ask him. And I asked him if he thought that we would start seeing that bridge, the gap starting to close. And he seems to think that it is true, that we're going to start basically unlearning all of our manners and social, niceties, and we'll start behaving more like we do when we're anonymous online or even interacting online, which is terrifying. But we are actually seeing this. All these people who have been LARPing their civil wars online are, little pockets of this are happening in IRL. We're seeing the LARPing happening in real life. And it seems to be getting more and more elevated. The stakes get higher and higher. So I'm not sure how we put the brakes on that. I keep thinking, I heard about that the gender reveal that started the parties. And I was like, this is Instagram's fault. That's my first go-to, because it is. Because I guarantee they were doing that so they could get some video for Instagram, and you have to keep outdoing the thing. And now there's a freaking forest fire. And I don't know. I've definitely been more. I think it's great we can all communicate, and it's done amazing things for my life. But I'm also like, social media was just maybe a mistake for us. We can't control ourselves.
Well, so I agree with you that thing is out there, but I feel like it's a question of both things are out there. So yeah. When Evergreen happened, I got rejected by the left. It didn't change who I was, but there was definitely a sense that they wanted to create that I was not part of their team. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up spending a lot of time talking to people on the center right. And at first there was a lot of insistence that I, welcome to the right, you've been red-pilled, all of that. And by the way, I still resent the borrowing of that metaphor by the conservatives. But nonetheless, so I did start spending all this time with conservatives. And the fact is, I found them very welcoming, very curious to run into a liberal that they didn't regard as crazy. And so that was a hopeful thing, was, I felt the embrace of a bunch of people who regarded themselves as on the other team. So it can definitely go either way. And the real question is, which way are we going to push it?
But were you afraid that they were perhaps weaponizing you?
There were a few who wanted, but mostly no. Mostly it was honest curiosity. And at first it was an honest belief that I had joined their team. And then there was once I made it clear, actually, this hasn't changed my perspective on what we should do. I was never with those crazy people. I'm still not with them. But I do think progress is something that we have no choice but to make at this point in history. They wanted to know more. And so anyway, I think my experience is atypical, but the fact of it says that thing is out there to be tapped if you can do it. And if you default into this sort of fight or flight team stuff, you don't discover that it's there.
Do you think that a lot of the reason is just the fear, the social risk that it poses to enter this space? I mean, essentially, I was at liberty to do so because I had nothing to lose. So I'm not working at a corporation. I don't have children in a school system. I'm not in a position where I have to worry about things that other people who might be feeling very similar feelings don't necessarily want to come out of the closet with their wily centrism.
I think it has a lot to do with the Milgram experiment. So for those who are not immediately familiar, the Milgram experiment was it was Stanley Milgram was a social scientist who studied the question basically of whether there was anything to the Nazi claim that they had just been following orders. that came up in Nuremberg. And so the test involved the subject of the test came into a room where they were instructed that they needed to shock a human being in a different room at increasing levels of voltage for each question that they answered incorrectly. And the way the experiment played out, the person who was doing the shocking, the actual subject of the experiment, believed that they were actually injuring and possibly going to kill the person in the other room who might have a heart attack as a result of the shocks. And the experimenter, who was a confederate of the experiment, would insist that the person continue to deliver the shocks even though they believed they were hurting this other person. And the thing is, the vast majority of people went along with the experimenter. They didn't want to. They believed they were doing harm, but they followed orders and up to the point of injuring or killing another human being. But the experiment was redone many different times. And one of the interesting results was that when people had seen an example of somebody standing up and rebelling against the experiment, they were much more likely to do it themselves. Huh. And so I think what I'm detecting is lots of people have skepticism and concerns about the teams that they've been signed up for, and they don't offer them right away. But when you show them that you're not the enemy and that they will not be punished for admitting those doubts, and that you yourself have doubts that you're willing to take the risk of expressing, it's amazing what comes back. I mean, even here in Portland, people will say very standard stuff, and then I'll say, I just don't feel that way about it. And it's like, oh, the confession is just coming.
Yeah,
right?
This happens to me a lot in LA too. It definitely, I've been at parties and people whisper, I saw you on Ben Shapiro or something like that. And then we'll start having a conversation. So I do wonder how much of it is preference falsification, because then suddenly everyone at the table is either in somewhat agreement or, I appreciate your distinction of what I'm hearing versus seeing, because now even people who might be extremely left or liberal, it turns into a reasonable conversation. People aren't screaming at each other. But I think when the stakes are this high 2 months before an election, where everybody has been told that it is an existential threat to to America, no matter which side they're on, that fear kind of takes over, and there's real reprisals for some people if they were to come out.
I think people fear them, and I think that is actually one of the things that keeps us from breaking out of this cycle, and it's only getting worse. This is exactly
so
what
do you
motivates
tell
this.
people to do? If they have, I think people underestimate, I'm always in shock at how people are so surprised that everyone's focused on the economy. That's basic, just putting food on the table. That's the primary focus for most people, is how are they going to feed themselves and their family? And how do you, I can't in good conscience tell somebody, well, take a risk of losing your job or your standing in your society and your kids being treated differently by a teacher or whatever, so that you can break the mold. What do you suggest for people in that situation?
Well, let me be very clear, and people absolutely hate this. Given why I'm well known to people, they absolutely want me to say, stand up, it'll be okay, it'll work out in the end. And I can't tell them that, because the fact is,
not.
Well, right. And it's not my right to take that risk for them by telling them it's safer than it is. So it's one of these things where I don't say what it is that people are hoping they will hear me say. And maybe I should. Maybe they really want just license to do it. But
one way of thinking about it is not what should they do, but what should we do, right? There are those of us who either have experience of writing and talking and being in the public eye for, in my case, 33 or 34 years, and like working without a net, and always, one flub away from having dire consequences, including tonight, hopefully. But like, that's different. When I go to a local school board meeting here or whatever, and I see parents in absolute terror, like a teacher, but there as not a teacher, as a parent, absolutely terrified to raise a very sensible, normal objection to some cockamamie new, let's remove all admissions at the performance arts school, including like a test to see whether you're good at performing arts type of thing. And I'm not making that up.
No, I know.
Doesn't want to say that because they don't want to be on a video being called a racist.
Right.
It ruins their day. So, and could be ruinous to their careers. So for me, and it's what motivated me to write about this more than anything else, is it pissed me off to see people using that tactic to silence the normals. So those of us who have at least a little bit of ability to be the abnormals, and can testify to other people's experiences or relate whatever our experience was that might have a broader application, and hopefully also to comport ourselves in a way that's sort of that's open and can transmit with a lot of different people. That's on us. Because then you can show an example yourself. Some people might be able to follow it, and I'm not saying this like as we're like exalted leaders. It's not that at all. It's not
I'm
really
an exalted leader.
You are, but like I totally am not. But it's like I can. There's a couple of things that we can do, and so it's particularly incumbent upon these people to not do the easy retweet of some virtual signaling bullshit that you may or may not believe, but like you think gets you out of trouble or like signals where you belong on a team. Screw that. Call things as you see them. Do it in a way that is that's honest and like without like fear and with respect to people with whom you disagree. And also spend some time kind of policing your own manners, I guess. Policing might be too strong of a word, but like being mindful of them and how you interact with people, and encourage people to be better to yourself. Like when people come at me with all kinds of hell, and I'm sure you guys have similar things, like my first response always is to be the nicest and most polite person back, because I want to give them the opportunity to not be a dick on Twitter. Like, you don't have to be this person. We can have are you interested in having a conversation with people who might disagree with one another, can trade information in a way that's mutually beneficial? Because I'm so there. And we can also like make fun of each other lightly in that process. But if you come at me and I'm like, this person or like an entire group of people is by definition awful, I want to bring you back into that fold. And if you're going to go two strikes on that, then okay, then we'll mute you out and we'll go in a different direction. But I think there's things that we can all do, those of us who have at least some kind of training in that world, or just like we're not born with the give a shit gene and react accordingly. I think that's helpful for other people.
I like that.
So that resonates for me, and I have a kind of an idea. We could start a movement.
I knew you were going to say that.
We could start a movement. We can't
call with their movements.
We can't call it the "Don't Be a Dick" movement. I don't think that's resonant enough. But we could. We'll come up with something.
I think it is.
Maybe we could draft some patriots who are like-minded about this meeting in the middle stuff. And what we would need though? We would need a prominent libertarian maybe to go and talk to the party about doing something other than losing another election. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, call me crazy.
I'm not a member of the party, Bret, as you well know. I'm happy to have any kind of conversation, but they do what they want. I talk to them.
Perfect. Well, I mean, it's all talk. Frankly, I do hope that they will talk to us, because I do think there's an opportunity for the libertarians here. Ranked choice voting would obviously be a huge upgrade to our system. So would winning enough of the vote to get federal funds in the next election cycle. So there's lots of reasons that are consistent with what the party stands for, that it might want to join the unity movement.
I still every time just love the question that someone in my community asked you, which was, how does Bret sit with balls that big to ask that of the Libertarian Party?
Well, it's not comfortable, Bridget. I'll tell you that much.
I appreciate that kind of, I think we need a kind of renegade revolution. And I do agree more than anything that it's 2020 and the most incomprehensible things have happened. So, why not?
I mean, why not? Exactly.
It's like just go, it's like that night you're out drinking and you're like, let's go to Vegas. And everyone's like, why not? This is Bret right now. He's like, hey, Unity 2020. I'm like, why not? Let's do this.
You've hit it exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe it's time for us to take our intermission and come back and address some questions using Democracy AI. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And maybe we'll have a drink. How does that sound?
I'm going to fill this patriotic glass of mine for sure.
All right. Well, maybe you'll have another drink, and I'll have mine first one, but maybe I'll drink it faster. We'll see. And Bridget, you can do what you think is right.
I'll be chugging Pellegrinos.
Whoa! Take it a little easy. The bubbles will go to your head.
Yeah, I'm ready to go to Vegas with Unity 2020.
All right.
I can see the bus.
The bus. We're not going on it by bus. All right. So let's say we take a 10-minute break.
Sure.
Oh, wait. I'm being told by Zach, my producer, that it will be 15.
Okay.
Okay. See you in 15 minutes.
All right.
Be well, folks.
Yep.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Unity 2020 Campfire with Matt Welch and Bridget Phetasy. Did I get it right, or did I lose my ability to pronounce your name, Bridget?
No, you got it.
Okay, good. That's twice in a row. Excellent. All right. So I would ask people, first and foremost, for this second part, if you are not logged into Democracy AI, click the link at the bottom of the screen, and it will take you to Democracy AI, where you can log in and be part of our discussion. And while people are doing that, I understand that some people who were logged in early were curious about what we meant, and I guess that means what I meant, by realized liberty. And really, this isn't very complex. I would just say there's a difference between what you have the freedom to do in the abstract and what you actually have the freedom to do and how free you are to do it. So imagine, I don't know, two different people living in two different parts of town. One of them, they've got high traffic streets with no shoulder, and the other one lives out in the suburbs where there are bike lanes. They both technically have the freedom to ride their bike to work, but one of these people has much more freedom because they're not taking their life into their hands in the same way to do it. So I would say the realized freedom is greater for the person who has the opportunity to ride their bike to work rather than the person who could but probably will decide not to because it's not very hospitable. Likewise, you may technically have the freedom to get on a plane to go somewhere, but you may not have the money to do it by virtue of the economic opportunities that you've got. So in order to liberate you, either the price of the ticket needs to come down, as Matt was pointing out, or the ability to earn needs to go up. So realized liberty is that fraction of the things you are technically free to do that you can act upon based on your assets and the hazards that surround it. You guys have anything to add or critique about that?
I would add just that, for the sake of fun, that there's also an imagination part of that, where you just can't imagine doing X. It didn't occur to you to try that you could be someone who could do X. I've been critical, and it was earlier obliquely, to changes that they've had in the local school system, admission systems. But the best thing about them is that a group of kids who were in faraway, lower performing middle schools now had the imagination that maybe they should apply to what were previously thought of as the elite or the best schools in the district. That's great. I want the imagination of opportunity to be broadened, because you're right, a lot of people, there's a difference between being on this end of town and that end of town in terms of what you have physical access to. But I think one of the things that, particularly not only on the left of the sort of economic conversations, people are so materialist in their kind of critiques of it, that they also forget about the imagination scale. And that's one of the greatest ways to transcend wherever you come from, even if you come from great privilege. You have a way of transcending that, or imagining a different scenario for you that breaks out of a family pattern, whatever that might look like.
Sounds a lot like Unity 2020.
Well done, Bridget. Thank you. But I would also say this is one of the places that I think conservatives have something very right, which is that sort of adjacent to your point about imagination, Matt, is the question of, given whatever opportunities you have, how much can you make of them? And so liberals tend to focus on the fact that the opportunities are very unevenly distributed. But even given whatever set of opportunities, you can make more of them or you can make less of them, in part based on imagination, in part based on dedication. And so, as a younger person, I was kind of deaf to the arguments about personal responsibility because it sort of sounded like an excuse not to solve the questions of unfairness. But as an older person, I recognize that actually civilization has an obligation to attempt to distribute opportunity fairly, but you have an obligation to attempt to make use of what opportunities you have, and that those two things actually, they're a package deal. And so I don't think either side has it exactly right, but I think both sides have a piece of it. And I'm very frightened by what I see as the sort of left-only side, which is focused entirely on unfairness and not interested in personal responsibility. And I'm scared too about the personal responsibility above all else version of things that just pretends that unfairness doesn't exist. And I would love to see a version of this that dealt with both sides of the puzzle. You know, we'll do our best to distribute the opportunity evenly. You do your best to make use of the opportunity you have, and that serves everybody to maximum effect.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, Elizabeth, are people up and running on Democracy AI?
Yes, and we have our first round of questions coming in. If you'll just give me a moment.
So for those who don't know, Elizabeth is a Unity volunteer, one of our highly placed folks who's in charge of a lot of things, including Campfire, and she's going to be manning the interface between us and Democracy AI. All right. Sorry I interrupted you, Elizabeth. What do you got?
So one of the questions that we have here is, how do you deal with all the hate when you have conversations and from social media and dealing with people who don't agree with you or who maybe just want to troll you? How do you deal with that in order to have productive conversations?
Is that directed at all of us?
Yeah.
It's a fair question.
I don't get that much. I get, I don't. But I am also like, I'm not an edgelord. I'm not like trying to troll people. I'm not trying to provoke reactions out of people. I'm trying to sort of present, you know, when I'm not writing about or tweeting about like silly music things that I'm interested in and very few other people are, or baseball or whatnot. I try to kind of present myself and whatever I've learned pretty simply and directly, and not as a way to kind of bait people into being on the other side. But you do get, you certainly get hate just by virtue of being in the public square talking about politics. And as I was saying before, I deal with it on a like, my first response is always going to be very pleasant, and the second one might be depending on the level of engagement, and the third one is the mute button, and I go on with my life. I want the world to be a place where we can have better conversations. Tom Petty, in his great "She's the One" soundtrack, underrated album from 1996, covered a Lucinda Williams song, and I forget. I think it's called you know I the name of this town or something like that. You know, it's all like a sardonic treatment of an ex-girlfriend. He's clearly totally burned, and he's like, you know, you can't hear me laugh. And honey, I'm laughing all the time. That's how I look at it. Like, I am laughing all the time. When people are so serious that they want to express hate to me, I find it hilarious. Sad for them, hilarious for me, and then I move on.
I think I love that. I think that I get probably mistaken as an edgelord just because my gut instinct is always comic. You know, I'm always trying to, my instinct is to try and make a joke or make something laugh. But I do also, somebody said to me that I'm like a child in an elevator when I view the world. And I just want to like push all the buttons. Turns out the world pushes back. So a lot of it I really recognize I've brought upon myself in many ways. Some of the more basic hate that I get that is really just kind of like, you're a grifter. And I think a lot of people think that my confusion is an act. It's not. I'm truly somebody who stumbled into this space. Unlike you, Matt, you were like, I've been in this for 30 years. I'm like, I've been doing this for 3. You know, it's not been very long. And it really just came by me being completely honest about the way that I was feeling and not self-censoring. And so I recognize that being in the public space, I'm going to get hate. So on a personal level, I know that I have to take care of myself. And if I'm feeling hypersensitive, even hormonal, I might just need to go off. I generally, if I find my blood boiling for some reason, I just don't disengage, because why? And I have to remind my therapist actually wanted me to quit Twitter for a while, because one of my whole core beliefs or whatever is that I'm worthless. And she's like, you get called garbage like hundreds of times a day. I don't know if this is good for you. And so I have to, there's a lot of self-awareness that has to go into my use of social media and being in the space. And I also try and engage people lovingly for the most part. And if somebody's just truly hateful or trolling, I can also appreciate that. I started as like a dirtbag in the mentions. I used to troll celebrities all the time. I thought it was hilarious that they even listened to me. And so I can, if somebody makes a, clever enough joke and they're trolling me, I have a lot of respect for that. So I don't know. I think we all handle it differently, but there are times where it's just, I know that I need to unplug when I start feeling like I hate everyone. That's when I know I have to unplug and take a break.
So I will say, I think your shrink may be excellent at what they do, but they're terrible at business, because keeping you on Twitter is what's going to keep you coming back for more. So, all right, I have a technique or two. So when I get something really hateful, I will write my response, and then I'll sit back and look at it. And if it says something like, "Are you some kind of moron?" I will take a step back and try to rephrase it in some more productive way. Now, how do you deal with the hate? It's not actually easy, I would say. There's a way in which and frankly, I think a lot of it is not organic. I very frequently will click on the profile of one of these accounts that comes at me just viciously, and the account doesn't make any sense. It was registered in 2012. It has 30 followers. It follows 550 people, right? And it's tweeted 6 times in the last year. I mean, it's bizarre. You'll just see some things that don't add up. So I think a lot of those are accounts that have been co-opted for a purpose. But there is obviously a lot of organic hate as well. And, I think both of you are onto something, which is seeing the humor in it. Or, if somebody really gets you, you can appreciate it, as you say, Bridget. But for those others, you have to see the humor in it. If you don't, then it'll just eat you up. So at some level, you've got to develop a thick skin, expect the hate to a certain extent. The thing that really gets you is when you think that your audience, the good people, or the people who might be part of your audience, are going to be dissuaded from possibly giving you the time of day because somebody levels a stigma at you in order to drive other people off. I find that troubling. It's like, you don't have the right to people may like me, they may hate me, but you don't have the right to try to shape that relationship to prevent them from giving me a chance, I
find that it really hurts when they're right. Like, there was a time when I had the kind of far right going after me, and they were like, she's probably just got stepdad issues and like male issues and all this. They were leveling all these things, and I was like, ooh, sometimes I'm that basic, I guess. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes the trolls are hurtfully right. And I also feel, not pity, but I sometimes will read something or even interactions that I get more upset by the people fighting in my mentions when they really start going at it, because I don't, that kind of anger that I see in the world in general and in people when they're really just leveling that kind of weird obsessive hate or whatever, I actually want to hug them. It can't be healthy to live like that, and it can't feel good. So my instinct is really to, like, as stupid and cliche as it sounds, to just kind of send them love and hope that they some people are just trolls. Sometimes, I'll never forget this one. I don't know. It was something really funny. my nephew really just discovered Twitter, and he's 12 and he loves it. And he had some tweet that went semi-viral, and all these people were yelling at him, grown adults, and I was like, they don't know that he's 12. They were like, breaking down his logic. I'm like, never forget that the person you might be fighting with is 12. like legitimately could be a thing.
Yep. No, that's true. So some people need a hug.
And some of them are 12.
Some people need a hug the way an anaconda might hug them, which is to say, squeeze the life out of them and leave us all better off. But yeah, the person you're fighting with could be 12. That's true. Or they could be paid to make your life miserable, in which case you'd be a fool to let them.
Yeah, and then just going into the election, I know that people were saying people in this space should not be retweeting or really engaging with people that you don't know or aren't really vetted, because there's a high likelihood it could be some Russian bot, and you're kind of giving lots of attention to someone that's not real.
If their Twitter handle is JT70751213972, nope.
You got to watch that guy.
That's my Twitter handle.
He's trouble.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Elizabeth, what do you have?
So the next question is for Matt. What sort of attempt at convincing the Libertarian or Green parties to support Unity 2020 has the best chance of succeeding in your eyes?
It depends on what Unity 2020 conceives itself as being, right? The people who are activists within the Libertarian Party are 2 months away from an election. They spent the last 4 years fighting laboriously to get on all 50 plus DC ballots, which really sucked during coronavirus to try to fulfill that. So many lawsuits, a huge percentage of their money goes into it. The Green Party, it's much fewer ballot access states this year because it's hard work. So professional party activists view most kind of newly drawn up political ideas that have a presidential election year associated with them with a kind of world-weary scoffing and scorn, because they've been getting their hands dirty on this. Like, so when, Evan McMullen last time, I'm going to run for president, it's going to be big. We got on, 11 ballots? David French was the trial balloon before that. Kanye West is happening this year. I think he might be on the ballots in 12 states. It's hard work. So if Unity 2020 is about getting on presidential ballots in November, then people, they're focused on the opposite, or they're focused on that so much they don't even understand what you're talking about. But as a bigger concept, of breaking the fevers of things, also realize that they're engaged in. It's competition for an idea, and their competition is based on their own sense of grouping of ideologies, some of which will have some temperamental commonalities with Unity 2020. Some of it will be in direct conflict of. So to the extent that everyone is having conversations, I know people in both of those parties, they love to have conversations. That's part of being a weirdo in politics, is that you go where you're invited. And so people are always eager and willing to talk. And so that's the first step of everything. Whether that's going to be persuasive to people especially who are on the organizing end of it, is another question. And just to flag a piece that I wrote just today, it's worth pointing out that if we believe the movement of polls, at least 2/3, and I would probably guess it'd be more like 80% of people who voted for third parties and independent candidates in 2016 presidential election are going to vote for the major parties this time around. Like, the third party vote is cyclical. It collapses, particularly after closely contested major party elections. So if you're appealing to those voters are going back into either the safety or just the rational conclusion of, I want to vote against the bad guy or the bad party. So it's an uphill struggle to try to to talk to people in the midst of that in a way that resonates with their concerns. Don't necessarily have the best strategy for it, other than being empathetic and open.
So let me ask you something about that, because this has obviously been a focus for us. And, Bridget has poked fun at me for this, but when we first actually launched the unity movement, we spent time figuring out whether or not there was a ballot access opportunity, what it involved. And when we realized that the way to it involved partnership with third parties, and again, this is not another party muscling in on their action. This is a movement that wants to partner. It seemed clear to us that in very straightforward terms, partnering with us would be advantageous, right? That even somebody who was narrowly focused on, let's say, the well-being and viability of the Libertarian or Green parties would still see this as positive by virtue of the likelihood of garnering enough votes to get federal funds. So you mentioned the expense of getting on ballots. Obviously, crossing that 5% threshold is very valuable. There's also the question of being understood to be an important force in American politics. And by partnering in such a way that suddenly we would be talking about this on, let's say, Joe Rogan's program, we would be potentially electing people to the highest office in the land. We would be advancing the cause of ranked choice voting, which is, of course, a huge win for third parties. That all of those things would seem to much more than justify the cost of sidelining the candidates of these parties in favor of something non-ideological and different. Now, I think there's an obstacle to this that is implied in your answer, Matt, which is if you've spent 4 years trying to accomplish a goal, it's very hard, at the 11th hour to imagine that actually the goal might not be the one that's most profitable to pursue. So I guess the real question that I have is, assuming we're right and that there's lots of advantage to be gained by a party that can see the vision of partnering with unity and making history, how does one get around the sort of sunk cost fallacy that keeps people doing what they have been doing because they've been at it so long and worked so hard?
Well, so I will non-answer that by in a way of like talking about one of the interesting internal dynamics of the Libertarian Party, and I'm sure the Green Party has a version of this, although I'm less in touch with their internal machinations these days. But fundamental conflict since the beginning of the Libertarian Party in 1971 is this a political project or is this a teaching project? Are we trying to convince people about an ideology by using the or philosophy by using the mechanism of elections, or are we trying to actually get office holders? And they've got 250 some odd office holders in the country at various places. So it's not nothing. I think there's something like 6,600 office holders in the country. So it's a sliver, but those are actual people. Jeff Hewitt, who's on the county board of supervisors in Riverside County. That's a real job, and he does real things that are important. So they have never answered that question. The answer is obviously in some ways both. But if you're listing it towards we want to use elections to promote a philosophy and spread it and teach it, then Unity 2020 is the opposite of what you want to do.
Got it.
It's a base conflict. If you are we want to elect people, or there's an overlap of like you mentioned ranked choice voting, which is more or less beloved among most third parties, and definitely the libertarian party as well. They're really interested in what happens in Maine and these kind of things. I think it might be most profitable to focus on those aspects of it, of knocking down ballot access requirements for third parties and other people wherever they exist, or whatever like obstacles there are to the normal functioning of people who want to engage in politics, not as it's been cartelized, but as it should be opened. I think that's the most profitable area of common agreement. I don't think you're going to get a well-established party. Even the Constitution Party is not going to suddenly wake up one morning and say, you know what, we've been doing this for I don't know how many years now, 16, 20. We're going to stop all that and get behind Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw. That's not how political parties are organized. And so the areas of engagement, I think, will be more on common interests that make sense.
Yeah,
I don't want to go to Vegas.
I at some level, I think I'm just my constitution is a bit different, and the fact is, I feel absolutely called to do something to save the republic from its own worst instincts, which I think are embodied by these major parties. And I guess I'm troubled by the fact I would think that the I don't know what we call the libertarians and Greens, second-tier parties, that the second-tier parties are more similar in some ways to the major parties in their obligation to party-level thinking than they are dissimilar and therefore hostile to the duopoly. That's the thing that I think is surprising here is...
I wouldn't agree with that characterization, but go on.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me, I'm taking that from what you're saying, that effectively the party machinery and the obligation to some long-standing belief about where they're headed and what the party should be doing would block them from seeing a historic opportunity that, frankly, is unique. This is not a normal election.
But you have to convince that's on you, not them. Right? They are political parties that are organized to compete in elections and have been for 20, 40, whatever years. That's what they do. That's what they're doing. So in order to have them stop that on some level, you really have to be extra persuasive. And that makes sense. They were organized on this basis. So if you're asking them to upend how they were organized, and it's not duopoly. They hate the duopoly too, but they are a political party that's competing in elections. That's what they do. So it is. I think you have to recognize that it's a big ask for them to change or alter that way of self-conception.
It is and it isn't. I feel like that this we are actually having a disagreement about what moment we are in. And some of us, the people who've been moved to spend their time on the unity movement, believe this is the storm the cockpit moment. We believe we've discovered there's nobody at the helm of the ship and we're headed into the North Atlantic and there are icebergs and we're going to hit one. Or somebody's taken over the cockpit and we're going to need to break in or we're going to die, right? I don't want to put it in overly stark terms, but the belief that the republic itself is in jeopardy and that everybody who's figured that out ought to be searching the landscape for what they haven't noticed that might be useful, right? That at that moment, that the patriots, who I imagine are throughout the Libertarian and Green parties, ought to be recognizing the patriots who have gathered around the unity movement, and they ought to be saying, hey, do we have a play? None of us have a play independently. If we put aside all of the things that we normally are driven by, and if we prioritize the crisis, do we have a play that might work out differently than either of the catastrophes we're headed for? And you can say, look, this is on you to articulate it. And I agree, it's certainly worth articulating as well as possible. But let's say I wasn't any good at that, and nobody in the unity movement was any good at it. Then it would be on those who have the keys to that play to figure out how much danger we're in and whether they can see it, right? I'm happy to put in absolutely everything I got into making the case. But the fate of the republic shouldn't depend on how well the case is made. It should depend on whether all of the patriots can figure out that together, if they pool their resources, there's something we can do.
So you do think that, the republic can't stand 4 more years of Trump or 4 years of Biden?
Let me put it to you this way.
This is a Flight 93.
I think it's a Flight 93. Am I saying there won't be a republic in 4 years? No. What I am saying, though, is this. I don't know that there will be a republic in 4 years. I think there are lots of people who understand the situation as well as anyone who are also concerned on that timescale. The fact that we are concerned on that timescale justifies evasive emergency action to avoid the catastrophes we are headed towards. And that the other thing, Bridget, is I think that there's something about this that's a bit like quitting smoking, right? Quitting smoking is very, very difficult, but it doesn't get easier. So to the extent that we might not be on a 4-year time horizon with respect to catastrophe, waiting another 4 years doesn't make the problem easier. It's going to make the problem harder. And so whatever the argument is, now is the moment that we are best positioned to do this. Frankly, I think 4 years ago would have been great, but we didn't do it 4 years ago. So can we do it now? And what will this conversation sound like 4 years from now? What will we be facing, right? We're already facing the questions, people are divided over whether 2 + 2 = 4 or not. So, we've fallen pretty far. And I'm not eager to continue down this trajectory until it's really clear to everybody that we're headed for catastrophe, because frankly, there's a point at which it's clear to enough people, but it's too late to do anything about it. I don't want to be there.
A couple of quick observations. One is that 4 years ago, the Libertarian Party ran on their main 2 candidates, who were both former governors, or Republican governors in blue states, ran on being fiscally conservative and socially tolerant, and that there was a 6-lane highway in the middle of the road between these 2 decrepit candidates who people instinctively didn't like. And in fairness to them, they got 3 times the vote of any libertarian ever, and it was the most third-party vote since Ross Perot in 1996. It was something that happened, but they ran, at least their campaign messaging had some commonalities to what you were talking about, and it didn't get the 5%, although they were polling that much. I would also add, and I'm just throwing these out here, they're not themselves arguments, but just little observations, that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I think, we could be talking about no labels in the same position that Unity 2020 is. Like, hey, look, let's get some patriots who have some kind of relationship with the center, even if they don't describe themselves as centrists, and let's all recognize the crisis and that both parties are becoming these awful kind of withered husks, and they're not responsive to public needs, and they have on their hands like a lot of disasters in the 21st century, including but not limited to the Iraq War, the financial crisis, and so on. And so, like, we got to do something different, dude. And so, what I think that the challenge for you in that context is, how are you different than no labels? How do you sound different in the ear of a Green or a Libertarian or a Constitution Party or whoever than no labels did at the time? And I'm not asking you necessarily to answer this right now, but just like as a brain teaser, and also that, like, that framing has been posed, at least in part, in the past. And the final thought I'll leave you with is that part of what we were talking about all night is the way that the catastrophizing of political conception has driven people, as Bridget has pointed out, in the fight or flight kind of response. Are you not doing that yourself? Are you not saying that right now, you want to tap into that fear impulse? And does leaning into it and recognizing it, and I say this not even argumentatively, because I think that part of me agrees with that. Part of me rebels against that, and I don't know where I land. But, like, by saying this is Flight 93, how are you different than Michael Anton saying this is Flight 93?
Oh.
And Joe Biden saying this is the most important thing in the history, like every single day. Donald Trump is like, Joe Biden, once we live, China runs the country. Like everyone is, he said that.
Everyone's on Flight 93.
Everyone's on Flight 93.
Right.
I'm kind of fucking sick of Flight 93. Fuck Flight 93.
Well,
like, no disrespect to the heroes, but like I want a nap. I'm ready for my nap,
dude.
So
you deserve your nap. But
thank you.
Here's the thing. The difference is the following thing. I see an electorate that all thinks it's Flight 93, and it thinks Flight 93 is coming from the other side. Can we agree on which side is in danger of destroying the republic? Let's just do that between us. Which side is it?
I'm not going to agree, probably. But go on.
You don't think either of them pose that hazard?
I think actually that the hazard is the dueling catastrophizing populisms and the disrespect for the institutions of liberalism that are associated with that. And this is a completely kind of mirror, even self-consciously oppositional kind of structure. That is the problem.
Amen, brother.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay. Why do you think we're trying to bring together somebody from the left and somebody from the right who know how to talk to each other, but to end that very pattern? I agree. That pattern is the hazard to the republic. Okay? So my feeling is we can go off the rails one of two different ways, or we can try something else. And my sense is that trying something else is what the smart people would do at this moment if they had the vision to see it. But I'm not going to pretend I don't think we're in danger because, I mean, first of all, I think if anybody has earned the right to say that the danger is real, it's probably me. Okay. I said the danger was real when this was crazy college kids with blue hair, right? And I said, look, I said this to Congress. I told them, this is going to spill over into everything. It's going to take over the government. It's going to take over journalism, the tech sector, all of it. It's coming, right? Well, I was right about that. And my point is, I don't think anybody knows where the stop button is on this thing. That's going to keep happening. And so we're going to get one of two things. Either that thing is going to start reallocating where opportunity is, in which case you're going to get one kind of catastrophe, or the rebellion against that thing is going to shut it down and pretend there was never a problem with opportunity in the first place. Both of those are extremely destructive to the republic. So it's time for adults. It's time for the adults. And, you know, if you want evidence that this is an unprecedented situation, name me an election in which one of the major parties did not offer a positive vision of anything, ran entirely on the negativity towards the other party.
It's a hard question to answer, but yeah.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's ever happened before. I mean, I've heard some tepid garbage from the parties. I've heard stuff I don't think they really believed, but I've never heard one of the major parties fail to articulate something like a vision that might appeal to some people, right? Frankly, I think both the parties are destructive forces and they're often cynical, but they feel obligated until now to offer some sort of a vision about how things might be better. And I literally couldn't tell you what it is that Biden is offering that's any different other than an end to the rock in the shoe. That's it.
But that's important for a lot of people. That is
clearly,
that's a huge, it's taken up so much space. That kind of idea of living rent free in the head. I think that people it is not really hyperbolic to say that Trump broke everyone's brains. You know, there's Trump derangement syndrome, there's Trump devotion syndrome, there's there's a whole spectrum of this. And I think that just not having to think about him, not that would even be the case if he lost, but the hope that maybe that exists means more to people who have been distressed and really in crisis for the past 4 years.
Sure, but if the need to have Trump gone has caused them to advance a candidate who amounts to a scarecrow, who isn't going to win the election and is going to return Trump to office, it hasn't accomplished the goal. So my point would be Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, electing them also takes Trump out of office. And so, look, if the Democrats were really serious about Trump being the important issue, they would be coming to us, right? Because we have a better ticket.
I mean, I think if they were really serious, they'd be moving to states where their vote mattered. Like, that's my biggest. You're gonna cry about it. Go move to Ohio.
Well, let's agree that whatever metric we use, the DNC is not apparently serious about governance. It's not all that serious about removing Trump from office, right? It would much rather have him as a caricature of an enemy. And I mean, it is announcing to us that it's done. It just simply offers nothing.
I will take some side bets with both of you about Biden beating Trump in November, because you both are expressing more certainty than I am on the other side of this. And so I sense an arbitrage opportunity here. I think that the one area of mild disagreement that I have is just the styled seriousness of trying to get rid of Trump. I think Joe Biden is himself not a particularly serious person or someone who I have any usable respect for. But I think he's an artifact of what Democrats wanted to, their best play at trying to beat him from their point of view. Wasn't not my point of view. It's from their point of view. I think honestly, from their point of view, like, are we really going to do this person, that person? I guess they all tried, and sometimes they climbed halfway up the mountain. No one could knock him off, and at the end, they're like, he's a known quantity. He's not going to scare people. At a time when cities are burning, he is the least radical, defund the police guy that you could have ever come up with in the Democratic primary. He's tough. He's tough to run against on those things that Donald Trump would love to run against. Donald Trump's running against Ted Wheeler and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But sadly for him, he's actually campaigning against Joe Biden, who's a different person. I think that reflects a certain attempt at pragmatism, regardless of whether you think that that's the right way to do it. But I think it was genuinely believed by a lot of people that was the right way to do it.
All right, so let us agree that for a scarecrow, Joe Biden is absolutely fucking formidable, right? I mean, the guy can still move his arms and legs, and he's got all kinds of capacity. He can blink on his own, but
barely.
All right, I think you're missing what's really going on in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, if you'll think back to Howard Dean. Remember Howard Dean? Remember what Howard Dean used to say about his candidacy? He used to say, "I'm from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party." Yep. Right? One of the funniest lines in politics in my lifetime. I'm from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. Well, why is there any wing that isn't Democratic? Oh, it's the DNC, which, all right, Howard Dean has now gone over to. But my point is, Joe Biden is not the best play that the Democratic Party had. Joe Biden is the compromise between two things. He's the compromise between what you said and what the DNC absolutely requires, which is a candidate that will not change anything fundamental, right? They had much better options, right? Andrew Yang was a much better option. Tulsi Gabbard, much better option, right? These people actually catalyzed some people's imaginations, but they were untenable because both of them were patriotic and insightful, and therefore might well have changed things were they to have been elected. So the DNC chose something that it knew, a known quantity from their perspective, that was safe from their perspective, but it was anything but safe from our perspective. And so that is the reason that we have to go outside this party, is that it is going to prevent change. And it told us this in 2016 when it pulled out all the stops to block Bernie Sanders.
I would just say that Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, both of whom I find intermittently interesting as mostly as characters, and somewhat of their personal policies. I like them. You have to register more than 5% of the vote. Like you have to capture the amount. The DNC does not control your lack of popularity in that case.
Well,
they can't.
No,
they can't.
Look, I can't
You
say
have to
that.
register.
I can't say what they do and don't control. I can say that the Democratic Party, through the DNC, chose Donald Trump. That Hillary Clinton wanted to run against Donald Trump because she thought it would be an easy win. He was the Pied Piper candidate, and that they advanced his candidacy through surrogates in the press. So that's not an advertised part of the way the Democratic Party functions, but it's something that we know took place. Right?
But do you think that was determinative in any way?
Yes. I think the
Really?
press...
You think that the DNC operationalizing the press to favor Donald Trump led to Republicans in the primaries favoring Donald Trump?
Well, first of all...
I think that's a little weird.
No, I think you have to understand what Donald Trump is. First of all, Donald Trump is a political genius, and he took the energy that came from the inept DNC and its attempt to amplify his candidacy because they thought he was weak, and it rode it, right? It surfed it. So it's not like I'm crediting the DNC with electing Donald Trump, but I am crediting them with amplifying his candidacy early on because they thought he would be the candidate they would have an easy time beating, and then discovering what he really was, which was a ferocious political animal. I do think that happened. And I think we saw in what took place with Tulsi and with Andrew that the DNC has very strong opinions about who gets to advance, right? The same force that halted Bernie Sanders in his tracks in 2016 got in Andrew's way and in Tulsi's way. And frankly, as a lifelong Democrat, I'm angry. I don't want my party deciding how to prevent change by manipulating the primaries and then claiming to support democracy in the general election. I want a party that's actually interested in seeing what its constituents want and advancing that ball. And that's not the party I have.
To me, the biggest influence the DNC had in 2016 was abetting Hillary Clinton in sweeping the leg out of anyone who even thought about competing against her. So she ended up competing against Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley. That was basically it. There just wasn't many other people in the game at all to begin with. And so part of the remediation of that, or like the difference of that in 2020, is that you had a field that was similar to the 2016 Republican field. You had 17 people running, 23 people, depending on how you measure Andrew Gillum or God knows who else. But like that becomes more difficult to be a choke point to that. And so I have some skepticism over how the DNC, controlled the machinery of 2020, 2019 in a way that changed how people behaved in the voting booth. At the end, Democrats voted in the voting booth, and they made their selection. And Joe Biden, love him, hate him, whatever him, and I've never, ever been a fan. He's been running for president since before I hit puberty, and I'm like 52 years old. But he was always ahead in the polls. There was like a half a moment when either Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren got kind of close to him, but he was always ahead when they polled actual Americans who were Democrats about this, and then he then won in the elections. And I think that it might just be that nobody else was able to compete against him for the affection of actual Democrats, as much as it has to do with the DNC saying, don't vote for Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard's a bit weird. Andrew Yang's a bit weird. I love them because of their weirdness, but they're weird. Let's not pretend they're not. And it was a hard sell in a year when Democrats want to be normies to beat Donald Trump, to get the skunk-haired gal who says strange things, and Andrew Yang without the tie and UBI, and what the hell is he talking about? And he's great. I love them both. They spoke most to me. But That's not the mood. In the similar way that there's not a mood in the country right now for third parties, I think there's a similar sense of hostility among the Democratic electorate. Don't give me the rando, give me the normie. I think that's what happened as much as anything else.
All right, Elizabeth, can you save us?
So you guys have actually answered a lot of the top questions, funny enough, that were coming in. Like, what would make unity appeal more? Yeah. What would make unity appeal more to the masses? And I think you guys have covered that a lot. But if there are any thoughts you have, especially Bridget and Matt, I know you're not on board necessarily. So what do you think might appeal to people that we're not quite reaching?
I'm not on board because, as I've said, I don't want to vote for. My biggest thing of why I won't vote is that I don't want to vote for either person that I don't believe in, character-wise, or I think Bret said it beautifully on the podcast that we did today on my podcast, where he said it's not even the person, it's this, which scenario do I fear worse? And I actually agree a lot with Matt saying it's this kind of escalating problem that I'm not sure how to thread the needle and see through. And I'm very much, I'm the girl who will go to Vegas, like, yeah, let's try it. Because I respect anybody who's going to try something differently, but I also maybe it's, on my bad days, I think on a spectrum, on my good days, I was saying America's going to burn either way, really. And I also feel like that might be a process that we have to go through no matter what. And on my good days, I'm pretty optimistic that we are resilient enough to withstand whoever wins, and that I certainly wouldn't think that I'm some kind of, I just don't think I have enough, power or influence or anything like that to be like, let's do this. And people would be like, the crazy girl knows nothing about politics thinks this is a great idea. But I also am inspired by just the idea of people coming across from both aisles and working together. And so I'm not sure that I don't want to give either this situation the power to be a Flight 93, because in a weird way, I feel like that's me giving up on what I believe we have. But on my bad days, I'm like, we're screwed. Yeah. And it's terrifying, if I really go into my most catastrophic. And I do think that you are, Bret, more equipped to see that catastrophic kind of thing playing out than, and your imagination has been grown because of your own experience to see that than I myself, or maybe Matt. So I'm not against it. I'm very much more logistical. Like, how does it even work? Because I'm not sure. It does seem ballsy to just, like what Matt was saying, to just kind of co-opt all of the work and money and resources that other people have been doing for years, and even giving up maybe their principles in order for people that they might not agree with. And so just from the practical level, I'm just trying to figure out how that plays out. But I'm not. I think it's like, yeah, let's go to Vegas, guys. Let's do this.
So I just want to briefly answer your last point there, Bridget. The point is, it's not taking their investment for something else. It's actually an arbitrage opportunity, and the question is, do they see it? So it depends a little bit on what you think is about to unfold. But if what is about to unfold is what I think it is, then the opportunity to substantially alter the structure so that it favors third parties going forward, to gain the federal funds in elections, the ability to have a seat at the table, and the ability to be regarded for the first time as a serious political force, and a heroic one at that, is something that I think if those parties could see it, they would understand was actually a tantalizing opportunity, rather than unity borrowing something right? It definitely is an investment, but the question is, where is that investment best placed? And I would argue that it is best placed in a movement that brings us together. Frankly, it could be both of those second-tier parties. From the point of view of the narrative of unity, if the Greens and Libertarians decided to participate together, that could be a slam dunk.
What do you think is about to unfold?
Well, I think you and I think the same thing is about to unfold. Assuming unity does not catalyze at the level it would need to, the election goes off as planned, the Democrats get stunned by the fact that what they thought was going to materialize based on their polling doesn't happen. This is predictable enough based on the fact that the Democrats are playing footsie with something that is threatening people who have a stake, right? It's threatening people who have pursued the American dream, who own homes, etc., and that they may not publicly say what they're going to do because they're afraid of being targeted, but privately they will vote for that which will protect what they've amassed. And at that point, what I'm really most frightened of is that you'll have Trump return to office empowered by what you and I both think is likely to be closer to a landslide, and that because he is a political animal in the way that we know he is, he will have appealed to the sensibility of people who are threatened by this woke movement, who frankly would ideally like to believe that there is no problem that needs to be solved, that America's a pretty fair place, and if you put in your hard work, you do okay, which isn't true. So I'm very troubled by the prospect of seeing America deviated from the path of becoming a country that really is fair to all of its subpopulations and being placed on a path in which it thinks it has no work to do on that front.
And what do you think will unfold if Biden wins?
Well, if Biden wins, I would predict that the Biden administration, well, first of all, I would predict that very quickly Biden will end up ceding power to Kamala Harris. I don't think it matters tremendously, except that I think this is probably the plan going into it, which troubles me because it really means that what we're electing is a party, not candidates. But what I think will unfold is an attempt to manage the anger of the woke movement and all of those that it has accumulated, and that attempt to manage them is going to backfire, that we are going to end up defunding police forces, instituting trainings, forcing people to say certain things to reveal that they are on board with all of this, and that ultimately it's going to cause a wicked backlash, right? So I find both scenarios quite frightening. And, if I didn't, I wouldn't be doing this, right? This is not an easy path, as you know. And what motivates it is the sense of, oh, my goodness, we haven't been left any good options. Maybe we can create one.
I would piggyback onto that following notion. Today was looking at polls for third-party candidates in the last month. There wasn't a single poll in the past month, state, national, doesn't matter, in which the combined total of the third-party vote was more than 5%.
Wow.
And keeping in mind that third-party votes, polling is usually at least 1/3 overstated compared to what happens on election day. Gary Johnson was polling at 4.8%. He ended up receiving 3.3%, right? Like, it's pretty standard how that happens. So last time around, there was something like 5.7% of the vote went to third-party or independent candidates. There were a lot of write-ins. A lot of people wrote in Bernie Sanders, especially in Vermont. So that's not going to happen at all this time. I think that most likely a call to unity that involves in a kind of a showcase way, hey, look, dynamic young person in the Republican Party, hey, look, dynamic young person in the Democratic Party, that the natural target audience for that, particularly at a time when the parties are both attracting a lot of voters, but repelling a lot of voters. No one wants to vote. No one's like, I'm a Democrat. It's like I hate Trump, so they're voting that person. So the natural constituency to your idea, I would imagine, is more within the parties themselves. The people who were voted Republicans their whole lives, but are voting for Biden this time, even though they disagree with them about everything.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are voting for Biden this time, although they're absolutely sick of corporatist DNC Democrats who suck on two or three of the issues that they hold most dear. The traditional parties are these hollowed out husks eager to be taken over. There is a sense, and I think you referenced it, Bret, earlier, of like, hey, look, the Republican Party came out of the Whigs. Like something happened then. So I think it's reasonable to assume at a time of heightened illiberal populism on both sides, is my perspective, maybe not Bret's, but maybe Bret's, that there is space for people who feel homeless in that situation to be part of the reconstitution. I think that is a much likelier source of manpower and woman power than the third parties, which have been toiling in cyclical ways in the marginal fields for a long time. I think that you're more likely to get the Dispatch and people like that interested in what you're doing than people who've been writing for Counterpunch for all these years.
Matt, what percentage of people who voted for Gary Johnson voted for him because they didn't want to vote for Trump? Because I'm hearing from so many people in these hundreds of emails that they voted for Johnson. They're, Republican conservative, and now you're enthusiastically voting for Trump now that they've seen what he's, on paper they feel he's done well.
CBS News and New York Times had exit polls in 2016. And they told a pretty similar story to voters for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. Gary Johnson's case, 55% of voters say they would not have voted. 25% say they would have voted for Hillary Clinton, and 15% say they would have voted for Donald Trump. Bunch of stories that go along with that as to the whys. It's somewhat unusual. Jill Stein, I think it was 61% would not have voted. And then it was also pretty close to 25 and 15 or 25 and 14, which is kind of surprisingly high for Trump. But what's interesting now is that there's a NBC News Wall Street Journal poll accumulation of polls of people nationwide who identified as either Stein or Johnson voters in 2016. Who are they going to vote for this time, right? Trump. And the numbers are kind of shocking. Instead of having a clear majority saying, yeah, screw it, I'm not going to vote. If presented with the two-party choices, now, even presented with more than two parties, they're saying 47% for Biden, 20% for Trump.
Really?
And yes, and only 1/3. It's a small poll, right? The sample size is 215 people nationwide, so do not over-extrapolate. But along with a bunch of other indicators of the wipeout of third parties in 2018 midterms, of the absolute, they're getting no money, they got no outside firepower who are interested in getting the nominations in those parties. All the indicators are that third parties as an overall category is collapsing, and the people who voted for them in 2016 are overwhelmingly, that poll says 2/3, then I'm going to say it's going to be more like 80% on election day are going to get sucked into the negative polarization game. They're going to come in to vote against somebody.
That's what I'm hearing over and over again. Just that seems to be tracking from what I'm hearing too. But
it's normal. Anytime after a close election, this happened. 1968 was super close election, and George Wallace got 13% of the vote. And the next time around, his party, whatever that was, American Independence Party, got 1 maybe. People after 2000. There weren't a lot of Green Party voters, all super enthusiastic. This is a normal cycle of things. I find it interesting from my admittedly narrow point of view that the Libertarian Party is going to do much better than the Green Party this time around. So it's sort of solidifying itself as the distant third party in American politics. But it is, for it'll be 3 presidential elections running, which is the most it's ever had in a row on that But like that category has really collapsed in this because right now it's a tough sell to come up with alternatives or even kind of like centrist recalculations.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Bret, are you okay, Bret?
Believe me, I'm fine. I do want to ask you a question that I know is dangerous. Bridget, I believe you've already told us that you're ready to go because you're fed up with the major party offerings, and I'm, of course, in agreement with you about that. Matt, I want to know from you, if it came to be you faced your ballot and Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw were on it, and the unity ticket was behind but in shooting distance, do you vote for it?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if it is behind but in shooting distance, that's a lot different than being in the same position as the Libertarian Party. Libertarian Party, I live in the state of New York. New York, the last time that the presidential contest between the major parties was closer than 16 percentage points was in 1988. We still had a Cold War. So we know how New York's going to turn out. It's going to be Donald Trump's going to lose by 20 percentage points. I'm going to very happily, as someone who thinks that he deserves to be fired, I'm going to very happily vote for Joe Jorgensen because Joe Biden does not reflect pretty much any of my values aside from my aforementioned desire to take a nap someday. I believe that he also wants to nap, and we can nap together, we'll cuddle up and spoon. If there was any party, if the Green Party was within shouting distance of that, I might be tempted. Given that I align more closely with Tulsi Gabbard than I do probably with certain Green Party members, although it's more or less the same, I would be tempted. I would certainly be tempted because I put in that rational calculation of, does my vote affect the outcome? If my vote does not affect the outcome, I'm going to vote for the party and the candidate as long as they're not horrible people. And Joe Jorgensen is a nice person. I'm going to vote for the candidate and party that aligns with my values because I'm not interested in giving people who I don't align with my votes or who I find to be personally monstrous. Mm-hmm. So that's my way of looking at your question.
Great. All right. Is there any more that we should say or do? Either of you, Bridget or Matt, have something you want to close with? And then I will ask Elizabeth if there are announcements that we have to make.
I just love you all. That's it.
I just wish that my keytar, the batteries work, because I would I'd play a lullaby right now in honor of the. No, this is wonderful, and thank you so much for inviting us on to have a conversation. Our conversation, Bret, that you and I and Heather and Camille had on the Fifth Column back in the day. It was Camille, yeah. Yep. Was really one of my absolute favorites there, and I thank you for it, and I think about it constantly to this day.
Well, I loved that conversation too. I really enjoyed my conversation with you, Bridget, which I think you released today. Yeah. So love right back at you both. And anyway, I really appreciate you doing this for Unity and hashing it out and being courageous enough to really say what you think, because that's where this idea came from, was the courage to just be candid about where you actually think we are. All right. Elizabeth, is there more that we need to say before we close out this campfire?
I just want to say thank you to you both, to Bridget and Matt. Really appreciate this conversation. It's been fantastic. And just one more thing in terms of housekeeping. We did start a referral campaign this past weekend. We're really excited about it. So if you go to articlesofunity.org, you can learn more about the prizes that you could win by referring your friends and family to our email subscription list.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Hang in there, America. We'll get through this somehow. Be well.
Good night.
Good night.
That's a great tagline.